Here's something that genuinely humbled me when I first saw it. I have a backyard garden that takes up a real chunk of my yard. Raised beds, in-ground rows, a dedicated composting corner, and most years I was still making weekly grocery runs for produce from June straight through October. Then a few years back, I visited an Amish family in Lancaster County and watched their grandmother walk out the back door into a garden that was honestly smaller than mine, smaller by a meaningful margin. And she was feeding 11 people from it, not just feeding them in August when everything comes in at once, but feeding them in November, in January, in March. Fresh food, canned food, cellared food, fermented food, 11 people, 3 meals a day, and that garden handled it without breaking a sweat. I stood at the edge of that plot feeling genuinely foolish because I could see it clearly for the first time. It wasn't about how much space she had, it was about what she was doing with every single square foot of it. Today I want to walk you through exactly how Amish families pull that off, step by step, so you can start getting significantly more food out of the space you already have. For most of my gardening life, I planted the way most Americans plant. Wide rows, plenty of room between everything, one big push in May, then ride it out until frost. My garden looked tidy, and about half the soil was sitting empty between rows at any given time, doing nothing but growing weeds. And when I started studying how Amish families use their garden space, the thing that stopped me cold was this. My garden wasn't underperforming because it was too small. It was underperforming because I was only using half of it at any given time and only for half the year. The Amish cannot afford that. When you're feeding 10 or 12 people without a grocery store as a backup, every square foot has to earn its place in every season. And the good news is you can apply the same principles without changing the size of your garden at all. The core shift is in how you think about what a garden is. And most of us were taught to see a garden as a place where plants grow in summer, and the Amish see a garden as a food production system that runs 12 months of the year. That sounds like a small distinction, but it changes everything. It means every bed has a job in every season, that the moment one crop is harvested, another goes in that same week, and that the harvest isn't just eaten fresh, it's preserved on a schedule, so the January table looks nearly as full as the July table. A well-managed Amish kitchen garden of around 2,500 square feet can carry a large family through the full year. Most American backyards have that much space in lawn alone. The first thing the Amish do differently is how tightly they plant, and the numbers are surprising. Most of us follow seed packet spacing, which was designed for conventional row farming with wide paths for machinery. If you don't have a tiller moving through your beds, that spacing is wasted ground. The Amish plant based on the mature spread of each plant, and staked tomatoes go in 18 to 24 inches apart in beds, 3 to 4 feet wide, with narrow walking paths of only 12 to 18 inches between beds. A conventional tomato layout uses 8 to 10 square feet per plant. The intensive layout uses 4 to 5. You've nearly doubled your density without crowding a single plant. Lettuce goes in 8 inches apart in every direction, rather than single rows with a foot of bare soil between them. Bush beans go in at 4 to 6 inches apart in staggered double rows. And the same logic scales to every crop you grow. The one condition that makes all of this work is soil quality, and the Amish know it well. Intensive spacing only delivers if the soil can support the demand. More plants per square foot means more competition for water and nutrients. And if you try close planting in depleted soil, you get stressed, crowded plants instead of abundance. That's why Amish families amend their beds with 2 to 3 inches of compost worked into the top 6 to 8 inches every spring, and mulch between plants with straw to hold moisture and suppress weeds. Soil comes first, close planting follows. Get that sequence backwards and you'll blame the method for a problem the preparation caused. If any of this is landing differently than you expected, if you're realizing your garden has more potential than you've been giving it credit for, I'd genuinely love to know. Drop a comment and tell me what your setup looks like, how many people you're trying to feed, and what's been falling short. I read every comment that comes in, and those conversations shape what I cover next. This is a small channel, and I want it to stay that way. The second technique adds more total food to the table over a full season than almost anything else, and it requires no extra space. The Amish never let a bed sit empty the moment a crop is out. Something else goes in that week. In early April, they sow a short row of lettuce. 3 weeks later, another. 3 weeks after that, another. By the time the first planting bolts in summer heat, 3 more rows are behind it, still producing, and when the last lettuce finally gives up in midsummer, that bed doesn't sit idle. It goes straight into turnips or radishes that mature in 30 to 45 days, followed by spinach or kale for fall and winter harvest. The bed never stopped working. Bush beans go in on a new row every 3 weeks from late spring until 10 weeks before first frost. Delivering fresh beans steadily for months instead of one overwhelming August glut followed by nothing. Radishes go in every 2 weeks through the season, beets every 3 to 4. Each individual planting is small, just 4 or 5 feet of row, but stacked across a full season, the cumulative yield from those same beds is enormous. The key to making all of this work is a written planting calendar. The Amish don't keep this in their heads, and neither should you. 30 minutes in February with a notebook, your frost dates, and the days to maturity on your seed packets is what separates a garden that produces 4 months from one that produces for 8 or 9. That single planning session is probably the highest return half hour you will spend on your garden all year. Subscribe if you want to stay with this, and I mean that as honestly as I know how to say it. I'm working through everything I've learned from these communities, one topic at a time, and there's a lot more ahead. If this kind of practical, unglamorous, actually works gardening is what you're after, I think you'll want to be here for the next one. The third technique turns the airspace above your garden into productive growing surface, and it's one of the most dramatic ways to increase yield per square foot without changing anything on the ground. The Amish grow up pole beans. Trained up a simple teepee of 6-foot stakes produce roughly twice the yield of bush beans in the same ground footprint, and they keep producing for weeks longer. Cucumbers grown on a vertical trellis take up about 2 square feet of ground instead of the 12 to 16 a sprawling vine would claim. The fruit hangs straight, develops evenly, gets better air circulation, and is infinitely easier to spot and pick. An Amish family will often run a simple wire or string trellis along the south-facing side of a fence for cucumbers, small melons, and winter squash. The fruit gets maximum sun exposure, the vines stay off the ground away from rot, and the bed below the trellis stays open for a low-growing crop like lettuce or radishes working underneath. For tomatoes, the Amish typically stake to 6 or 8 feet and prune to 1 or 2 main stems, keeping the plant in a narrow vertical column rather than a sprawling bush. A staked pruned tomato can produce 10 to 15 pounds of fruit in a space barely 18 inches wide. You don't need expensive systems for any of this. Wooden stakes, garden twine, and basic pruning have done the job for Amish families for generations. The fourth technique is one that most gardeners have never considered, and it's the one that gave me the most immediate return. The first season I tried it, the Amish plant fast-growing crops right alongside slow-growing ones in the same bed and the same time. They call it interplanting, and the logic is straightforward once you see it. When you transplant tomatoes in late spring, those plants are small. They won't fill their allotted space for 6 to 8 weeks. During that time, the soil around them is bare and doing nothing. Amish gardeners tuck a quick crop into those gaps, and the same day the tomatoes go in. Radishes are a favorite. They mature in 25 to 30 days. And by the time the tomato plants are spreading and beginning to close in, the radishes have already been pulled and eaten. You harvested a full crop from space that would have otherwise produced nothing. Lettuce works the same way alongside peppers. Sow seed 6 to 8 inches from each pepper transplant in early spring. Harvest the lettuce before the pepper canopy closes in, and the bed produced double the food during that window. Carrots interplanted among cabbage are another classic Amish pairing. Carrots grow slowly and stay low. Cabbage starts small and gradually spreads, and by the time the cabbage leaves are shading the ground, the carrots are well established and actually benefit from the cooler conditions. The rule is simple. Pair a fast crop with a slow one or a tall crop with a short one, and as long as one finishes before the other needs the space, you've doubled your production from the same ground. And the piece that ties all of this together: intensive spacing, succession planting, vertical growing, interplanting, is preservation. And I want to say something about it that I think gets missed. An Amish family canning tomatoes in August isn't doing it as a hobby or because they enjoy a hot kitchen in summer. They're executing a plan that was made in March. They already know how many quarts of canned tomatoes they need to last from October through May. They planted enough to produce that surplus on purpose. The same math applies to every crop they preserve: green beans, cucumbers, potatoes, winter squash, onions, carrots, cabbage. Each one has a destination before it's even picked. This is why the whole system works and why a half-hearted version of it often disappoints. The intensive planting creates the volume. The preservation captures that volume and spreads it across the calendar. Without preservation, an intensive garden just produces more waste than you can eat in season. Without the intensive planting, there isn't enough surplus to preserve. The two halves depend on each other completely. There's one more small technique I want to leave you with because it is so simple and so immediately useful that I've done it every single season since I first saw it. The Amish plant a ring of radish seeds around every tomato, pepper, and squash transplant on the same day it goes in the ground, seeds scattered in a rough circle 4 to 6 inches out from the stem, about 8 to 10 per plant. The radishes germinate in 3 to 5 days and do two things at once. They break up the surface soil around the new transplant, helping water and air reach the roots. And they act as a living mulch during those first critical weeks when bare soil around the transplant would otherwise be losing moisture to evaporation. By the time you pull those radishes 3 or 4 weeks later, your transplant is well rooted and moving, the soil has been naturally cultivated, and you've harvested a handful of fresh radishes from ground that would have otherwise sat empty. 30 seconds per plant, free food. And the transplants genuinely seem to establish faster for it. If you've made it to the end of this and something here has changed, what you're planning to do in your garden this season, please leave a comment and tell me which piece of it got you. I don't ask that to drive engagement. I ask because you genuinely want to know which parts of this land and which ones need more explanation. That feedback shapes what I make next. And if you know someone who's been frustrated by a garden that never quite delivers what they hope for, share this with them. That's the most useful thing this video can do. Thanks for spending this time here. I'll see you in the next one.